first version of the Reality Check with Charles Butler. We offer a hard-hitting, factual analysis of social economic issues from a slightly different perspective that you will see in mainstream media. Today, we're fortunate enough to have Michael Lucci with us, who's Vice President of Policy from Illinois Policy Institute. Here in Chicago, something that's not being talked about in the media, but blacks are doing a reverse migration. If you remember, the Great Migration was blacks coming up from the South to Chicago, to New York, Pennsylvania, and Detroit, Michigan, to work in the plants. Now we're seeing the reverse, and no one's talking about it. But we're going to talk about it today. Welcome, Mr. Lucci. How are you, sir?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me on.
Well, it's a privilege and a pleasure. You know, Illinois Policy Institute, first of all, does just some great work. And you can find you guys at illinoispolicy.org, is that
yes.
correct? And you've written a number of pieces there that are just outstanding. And you've done a lot of work in the black community. So it's not like you're writing about things that you haven't done or been involved in. In fact, sure. Your story about Uber, which we'll get into a little later, I think was just right on
sure.
point. But look, in Chicago, and no one's talking about this reverse migration, if you want to call it. Blacks are leaving Chicago faster than any other ethnic group.
Yeah.
And it hasn't been mentioned anywhere. Why do you think that is, Michael?
Well, it's an inconvenient fact, really.
Okay.
I think that the Democratic Party in Illinois and certainly in Chicago wants to say it's the party that advances minority causes.
Okay.
But the fact is, blacks are leaving the city of Chicago and leaving the state of Illinois faster than any other group of people because there's not enough good opportunities for them here.
Right.
The cost of living is too high for them here. So when you put those two factors together, and you have crime, there are crime problems too. It's just not a good deal, and there are other places where they could go. As you said, the whole reason why the black families moved from the South to the North was there was some discrimination for sure in the South, but there was economic opportunity in the North.
Right.
And now that economic opportunity in manufacturing, in construction, in a lot of jobs that the South Side community used to really build upon, those opportunities aren't there so much. So they need to go to places like Indiana or to Texas where those opportunities still exist.
Well, even the opportunities that I see that exist here, blacks aren't getting those opportunities anymore. Whether it's construction, you go to a construction site, you see all Latinos. You see a few white guys, but the majority of the workers are Latino and very few blacks. And we have a lot of government jobs, like when they put in I-94. You look at I used to talk about this on my radio show, and I still, when I had a local show here on WVON, the O'Hara Modernization Project was a $15 billion project, people. Blacks had less than 1/2 of 1% of that contract. Hispanics had 28%. White women had 25%. Asians had 15%. This is a city where black taxpayers are about 42%. Plus or minus. They couldn't get any of these contracts. The question becomes, it's an economic issue. We're spending taxpayer dollars and we're not getting much in return in terms of jobs, opportunities, contracts. When you have a city the size of Chicago with the kind of black population we have and we can only get 2% of contracts, something's wrong with that picture.
There's something very wrong. So as you point out, the taxes are going up. Taxes are going up on all communities. But
do we have the highest? I think we have the highest taxes in the country, don't we? At 11 point something percent.
The highest sales tax, for Chicago. Property tax is very high, especially compared to other large cities. Right. So there's a lot of taxation. Then Chicago actually has higher overall taxation than pretty much every other city in the state of Illinois. So the cost of living and the taxes are high, and so that is a pain point for all communities, black, white, whatever. Right. But then the opportunities for good jobs, they're really not there. So you point out some of the issues that affect black employment. There's also, there are laws that make it difficult for them to get construction jobs. There are regulations that drive away manufacturing jobs. And
let's talk about that for a second, because we touched on this offline. I've often talked about the Davis-Bacon Act. The Davis-Bacon Act, for those of you who don't know, was a law that was instituted in the 30s by two Southern Democrats to keep blacks out of well-paying jobs during the Depression and during WPA when we were doing our building, all these government jobs. So they call it the Prevailing Wage Act. So you had to be in the unions in order to be in the Prevailing Wage Act. Do you understand that we still have problems today with blacks being in trade unions? Blacks are in automotive unions, but very few blacks are in trade unions. In fact, affirmative action was founded on the principle of integrating trade unions, and that started here in Chicago with my good friend Art Fletcher, who was an assistant Secretary of Labor under Richard Nixon. And we can talk about that at a later time. But Nixon told Mayor Daley at the time, this was in 1973, that if Art was injured or had a scratch on him, that he'd have the 101st Airborne marching down State Street on Saturday morning. Wow. That's a real president.
Wow.
You know, that's like Donald Trump. That's why I like Donald Trump, but we'll talk about that a little later. But when we talk about the Davis-Bacon Act, that's what that law was put in place for, to keep blacks, and I always talk about pursuing the American dream. You know, and I think since 1968 that blacks have been going out of the world backwards in terms of pursuing the American dream, like the term African American. We're not African American, we're black Americans. Or we can be Negroes, we can be whatever, but we're certainly not African Americans. We're black Americans. And that term is a term that I find a lot of black people don't like. Jesse Jackson implemented it in 1986. And I think they put it together up in Martha's Vineyard one summer with Louis Gates and all his bourgeois friends. And we have this term, and I think it was one of those terms to stick it in the face of whitey, African American. But it hasn't done us any good. And it has taken away from pursuing the American dream. And the American dream should be whatever we as individuals see it as, not as a collective group. And Michael, you know, given the policies, and we talk about policies all the time, I think that if I were president, people used to ask me when I would criticize President Obama, what would I do if I were president? And I said the first thing I would do is to change these social policies that have devastated the black American family. One, i.e. ADC, these federal, welfare programs. I would not eliminate them, but I would structure them so that they would give help. If you had one baby, we support that one baby. Two, you own your own. That's the way ADC used to be when it was created in 1933 under the Social Security Act. A lot of people don't even know where ADC stemmed from. They think it was a social program that President Johnson created. No, it was created in 1933 under the Social Security Act. And by the way, you black feminists out there, you weren't part of it. You were written out of the Aid to Dependent Children Act by law. You were considered part of the workforce. All this feminism, all the suffrage movement, black women, not part of that. So you can be a black feminist if you want, doesn't count. I'm sorry, go ahead. I just thought I'd dig that in there about policy.
I think on two policies, economic policies, we have prevailing wage, and there's very substantial research that shows this causes black construction workers to have fewer jobs, to have fewer opportunities for these big public works projects. That research is out of Harvard, and there's research that shows when you get rid of the prevailing wage law, that black employment in the construction trades and black wages in those trades actually go up. So that's one policy, and there is a history to why we have that prevailing wage, or the Davis-Bacon Act.
That's still on the books.
That's still on the books.
Yeah.
And we have one.
But we don't enforce it for the Latinos, and it's something I've always talked about.
We have one specifically for Illinois. We have our own.
And
so
what is it called? Do you know?
It's just the Illinois prevailing wage law. Next door, Indiana got rid of theirs. Other states are getting rid of their prevailing wage law. Illinois, it's still a very touchy subject. But it is, there's very good research that shows.
Touchy because these trade unions keep black people out. And they do it, it has to be intentional. There's no, I used to have trade journeymen call me all the time when I was at VON, and I'd be talking about these issues. A black guy could not buy a job on the O'Hara Modernization Project. $15 billion project funded with federal dollars. It's incredible. And these politicians, I don't care if they're local, state, or federal, they just collect a paycheck every two weeks. They're not doing their jobs. They need to focus on economic development. They need to focus on education. You know, I've said time and time again, Mike, and I don't know if you've heard this, but I was the first person to call Chicago neighborhoods on the south and west side war zones. And I requested that the National Guard come here. The only guy who recognized me for that was Anderson Cooper on 360.
I think that, you know, I've worked in some of those neighborhoods. I've worked some in Englewood, some in the South Shore, and I taught at a school at night where we saw people shot in front of our door multiple times. And so
how did you feel about that? Were you traumatized by that at all? I mean, here we are, you know, we're living in wars. You think about, when you think of people being shot at a school or in the streets, you think of Fallujah, you know, Mosul, Islamabad. But here in Chicago, and I said this time and time again, that when I worked at WVON, it was comparable to me. I felt that I was in a war zone. I carried a gun to work every night with 3 clips because I was in a war zone. Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, the gunshots, I've been around guns a lot, but what immediately struck me was, how do these kids learn when someone's being killed outside the door? They don't know the person for sure, and it's probably related to a drug issue, but how do these kids in this tutoring center learn when they're seeing people shot literally right outside the door? Like we saw it happen. And that's not the worst neighborhood in Chicago.
Right.
But it struck me because, you know,
these are children.
These are children.
And we're talking about bringing refugees from Syria and refugees from Somalia and all these refugees, when I think the people on the south and west side of Chicago should apply for refugee status so they can be resettled to nice neighborhoods and get a home and get a car and get a safe school to go to.
Well, I think that as a city, as a state, we should look at what would benefit those communities economically.
Okay.
So for sure, aside from the drug issue, which is a very real issue, brings a lot of crime with it, but the south side of Chicago was big-time manufacturing. In southern Cook County, big-time manufacturing. Well, those industries have been crippled by certain government policies and property taxes. I once spoke, early when I started at Illinois Policy Institute, there was a manufacturer who was leaving southern Cook County, going right over the border to Indiana.
Yeah.
I called him and I said, you know, what's going on? Why are you leaving? And he just said, you know, the cost of business is crazy here. We're going to just go over the border 15 minutes. We're going to move 15 minutes and do there. And I asked him, what's going to happen to your manufacturing facility? Who are you selling it to? He said, I'm not. I'm giving up ownership of the facility because the property tax is so high, nobody will buy it from me.
Exactly.
Nobody. So, and that's what you've seen in southern Cook County. The industry's been driven out. The homes are getting crushed by property taxes, and the families there, who are largely black families in Southside Chicago, Southern Cook County, they're getting crushed by their property tax, their cost of living, and their lack of job opportunities.
And you know, these politicians are tone deaf. You know, Madigan has a home in La Jolla, or in, it's not La Jolla, it's Rancho San Diego. So it's my understanding that he flies from Springfield or wherever to, or St. Louis, over to San Diego every weekend to be with his wife. And that aside, the bottom line is he has no intention of working to remedy the deficit that we have. You know, they just callously say, well, we can just raise taxes. Well, you know, we have a deficit in opinion. Well, we can just raise taxes. Well, when we lost what, 300 millionaires last year that moved out of the state, moved to Florida?
3,000 millionaires. In the most recent year of data, the city of Chicago lost 3,000 millionaires in 1 year. So that's millionaires move out, millionaires move in.
Right.
On that trade-off, we had 3,000 millionaires move out of the city of Chicago.
Wow.
We're not sure what the state of Illinois looks like, but to tell you how big a deal that is, we were number 3 in the world for loss of millionaires.
Right.
And the top 2 cities are these European cities, you know, Athens, Paris, and Rome, where they've got significant problems and serious tax issues. So we were the only city in North America that showed up for millionaire flight. And of course, we were international in our rankings for how many millionaires are leaving the city of Chicago.
There is a company that I work with that was a sponsor of my show. They moved their headquarters to Florida. They just left.
Yeah.
You know, and I have friends who have left and gone to Florida to work, and they said, not only is the weather great down here, but I gave myself a 12% raise moving to Florida.
That's true. That's true. You moved to Florida, you moved to Texas, moved to Indiana. If you're a homeowner and you move to Indiana, you're going to have more house and a lower tax burden for the same price.
Yeah.
But I think that you made a point that always strikes me, which is if the folks who make these decisions actually lived in the communities affected by these decisions, communities where I've taught, where I've worked, I grew up in communities that relied on manufacturing industry, we would have a very different state.
No question.
We'd have a very different state. So if you look at southern Cook County, south side of Chicago, west side of Chicago, Decatur, Rockford, Kankakee, the communities that need these blue-collar jobs, they are not considered when these decisions are made. Why can't we reform something like workers' compensation, which has a huge effect on manufacturers? Because the trial lawyers don't want to change it. And the trial lawyers have a lot of political clout with the people who control the state.
They do. And, you know, we look at the pension situation, for instance. If you go to open the books, I don't know if you're familiar, you know Adam Andrzejewski? You know, he's done a great job. Eddie Andrzejewski is a good friend of ours and a great friend of Illinois Policy Institute. And you can go to openthebooks.com and you can find out how much money teachers are making, how much pension people are making, any public official. He's done a great job with that. But the point is, we're paying people who were teachers $200,000 a year in pension. What teacher deserves 200, or an administrator deserves 250. These aren't people that generate profit. These aren't people who go out and make anything. You know, these are people who are teachers.
Yeah.
And so we look at tuition in our colleges that are that has just become outrageous. When I went to college, tuition was $1,500, and room and board was another $1,500 maybe, manageable. These kids today, they're leaving school with $100,000 in debt. Why? Well, because we're paying teachers $200,000 a year.
If you look at the state universities, the majority of state tax dollars that go to the universities go to pensions.
Okay.
So it's being eaten up by the pension costs of those universities. What we've said for a long time is, one, have people on 401ks. So every month you pay in, I pay in, and that's the 401k, just like most people in the private sector have.
Right.
Because it's more affordable for taxpayers. But the other reason is, there are people stuck in the pension system now, and it's very likely it's not going to pay out for a lot of them. And so they have a tremendous amount of uncertainty, where for those individual workers, they should have a retirement account that they control, not the government controls, because the government clearly cannot manage these things. So the government is going to keep trying to raise taxes to pay into these pensions, but they broke the pension system. So let the workers out. Allow them to have 401ks. It's more affordable for taxpayers, and it's more fair for workers who need to know that they have that money and they're not relying on some politician's promise that he's going to go get it from some taxpayers who are leaving the state.
Well, that solution was proposed to President Bush back in 2001, 2002. And the National Manufacturing Association was a group I was working with who was presenting it to the Bush folks. And they said, we don't need to put all of our Social Security dollars into the market, but just let the people take 20% of their Social Security dollars and put it in the market. It will out-earn whatever you're paying them from the Social Security system anyway over a period of time. So, when we look at these issues, we're talking about policy. There were policies, in my opinion, that were put in place, and I'm writing a book about this. It's called The Miseducation of the Black American, misled by teachers, preachers, and politicians about the pursuit of the American dream. And in this book, as I'm doing my research, I realized that there are just a number of government policies that have been implemented, that have been used, that have been brainwashed. Because if you ever listen to my old station, WVON, and what these people have to say about Donald Trump, I'm like, when a guy talks about bringing jobs back to America, and you can't buy into that because you're a Democrat, and I always say, well, Daley's a Democrat. All the Daleys were Democrats. They've always had their foot on black folks' neck here in Chicago. When you talk about police brutality, you talk about housing, you talk about redlining. These are all things that have taken place in a Democratic city.
Yeah.
A city totally controlled by Democrats. There are no Republicans to say, well, they're racist. No. When we look at education, which you play a big part in, and have played a big part in, we're funded, I think, less money than Schaumburg or Naperville or some of these prevailing suburbs. And our teachers, though, are some of the highest paid teachers in the country, but we have some of the lowest test scores. And so I asked Karen Lewis, who is president of the unions, teachers union, how do you correlate that? How do you justify that? She's very serious, and I like Karen. Don't get me wrong. I think she's a great union president. She said, well, Charles, we have to first be parents to these children. We have to feed these children. We have to be social workers to these children. We have to be psychologists for these children. And I'm going, but you get paid to teach. And she said, well, we can't teach until we get these other things out of the way. So you look at the SNAP program, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Why are we giving these mothers a link card to feed their children, and their children come to school hungry? That's a great question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why would Mayor Daley take truant officers out of the school system? That was a very vital part of children graduating, children matriculating through the school system, the truant officer program.
Well, I think that you're pointing to, and I was pointing to, there are a lot of policies that are in place. I wouldn't say it's rigged. Mm-hmm. I would just say there are policies in place that don't benefit the black community.
Or any community, really.
The bad effects of those policies aren't really explored enough.
Okay.
So, state of Illinois, highest black unemployment rate in the country.
In the country. Yeah.
We should look at why is that? Why don't black folks have jobs here? Why do they have to move to Indiana to get a good job? Why do they have to move to Wisconsin?
Yeah.
In Illinois, Indiana and Wisconsin are sort of these pariahs.
Right.
Like mean conservative states. Well, this is where black folks are moving to get their jobs.
That's right.
So what is it that Illinois is doing that's making it so hard for black families, not just black families, but black families to get a good opportunity here? Why is it so expensive for them to live here? What are we doing differently?
Well, you know, Mike, 3 years ago, I talked to an alderman friend of mine, a guy named Howard Brookins, who was largely responsible for bringing Walmart into the city boundaries, and he fought Mayor Daley heads up, and we fought him several years down at WVON, and brought the rest of these black aldermen on board because their neighborhoods were totally food deserts, right? So anyway, at that time I said to Howard one morning, I said, Howard, black unemployment is at least 50%. And he said, no, it's not that high. So we had a little debate, so we moved on. The next week he had a fundraiser. He used a quote from one of your articles that said, black male unemployment in Chicago was over 60%.
It's, depending on, it's way too high. No matter how you calculate it, it's way too high.
But 60%? I mean, it's unconscionable. When Martin Luther King marched on the White House for jobs in '63, black unemployment was 6.2%. The reason he marched on the White House, and a lot of people don't know this, is because Kennedy had told King if he supported him in the general election, that he would eliminate black male or black unemployment and black job discrimination with the stroke of a pen, an executive order. He didn't, and that's why we had the march in June of 1963 on Washington, D.C.
So black unemployment is way too high. We've been pointing this out. Illinois has had the highest black unemployment rate for nearly 2 years.
Right.
City of Chicago,
How do we compare nationally? Is it the highest nationally?
It's the highest nationally.
Okay.
Yeah. Illinois has the highest black unemployment rate in the nation. City of Chicago, it's very, very high, as you pointed out. And I think...
No, as you guys pointed out, Illinois Policy Inst.
That's true. But I think that is not... That question needs to be asked. Why? Why do we have
are politicians asking that question? That's what we pay politicians to do. All these community activists and social that's not their. We pay politicians to go out and do that.
I think it's just
we vote for politicians to do that.
It's an uncomfortable fact that
why?
Because Illinois has been run by the Democratic Party for a long time. City of Chicago has been run by the Democratic Party for a long time. They say that they champion the black community, but the outcome is terrible. It's
always
terrible. And so how do you deal with the fact that we say we champion the black community, but we have the highest black unemployment rate in the country, and we're not doing anything about it?
Never.
We're not trying to fix it.
And we have these war zones, Michael. So, I mean, you know, like I know, you've been to the South Side. I mean, it's a war zone. I mean, these people who are being shot, these children who are being shot, they're not in the gang. They're not involved in drugs. They're just walking down the street.
They're a lot of innocent bystanders.
Do you know in Los Angeles, a good buddy of mine was the superintendent of LA School District, a guy named David Brewer, Vice Admiral David Brewer, 3-star admiral. He said that he did a test and he found that 70% of the school children suffer from PTSD.
Wow.
I think the same thing would be true here. The kids are going to have low attention spans, they have anxiety. I had a friend here, very high elected black city official. Her child would not go to school. He was afraid to leave the house. She had to send him to a private school because he thought he was going to be killed. That's how bad it is here. Nobody talks about it. We're talking about people in Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan and the Congo and the Sudan when these things are going on right here in Chicago.
So one example I would point to.
We got 3 minutes. Go ahead.
And I do have you know, a stake in this fight, but
okay.
When Uber, the company, came in, they specifically went into minority communities and said, we can get you a job to make ends meet. And what did the city do? The city immediately started trying to crack down on them.
That's exactly
and
right.
I thought that that was so immoral because Uber was specifically going, and Lyft, both companies, were going to the communities where people haven't had opportunities.
Underserved.
And saying, we can, I mean, I actually did that a couple weekends. I signed people up to do that type of work. And then the city came in with the highest black unemployment rate in the country.
Right.
The city came in and said, we're going to make this more difficult.
Oh, no question.
We're going to make this more difficult.
Yeah.
This is where we need to look at outcomes. So what I would advocate for is let more free markets, free people, free enterprise work, and you're going to get those better outcomes. You're going to have more jobs, rising income. Let more manufacturers move in here.
Let people pursue the American dream.
Yes.